Yeah, that should be.
But then residential, that's
No, he's out of town.
I saw one.
Looked like maybe 100, 150 houses, exactly the same, all of them.
around on
Up to north and out east.
Nice. All right, good afternoon, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started here. Looks like we've got everyone we need. Welcome to the Great Falls International Airport Authority Board Meeting. Today is March 28th, 2023. As a reminder, the mission of the Great Falls International Airport Authority is to optimize transportation services and development in our region. And the vision of the Great Falls International Airport Authority is to maximize the airport's benefit to our region. Welcome to everybody. We appreciate you guys being here. If anybody from the public does have any comments, please just stand and identify yourself, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. We'll go ahead and start with the roll call. Commissioner Eretz. Here. Commissioner Gibbs.
Here.
Commissioner Husted. Here. Commissioner Lalonde is here. Commissioner Hoven.
Here.
Soon to be Commissioner Thompson.
Here.
And Commissioner Timbo.
Here.
All right, with the quorum of the board president, I call the meeting to order. Let's go ahead and start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we are welcoming a new commissioner today, and if you wouldn't mind coming up front, we'll get you sworn in. So we'll just have you stand right here, raise your right hand, and read that facing the flag.
I, Terry Thompson, do solemnly swear and affirm that I will support, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of Montana, and that I will discharge the duties of my office of Commissioner in and for the Great Falls International Airport Authority of Great Falls, Montana, with fidelity. Thank you.
I'll just sign that. Such a pretty signature. All right, we'll go ahead and start with the consent agenda. As a reminder, the consent agenda is made of routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion or vote by any board member. Today we have item A, approval of board meeting minutes for February 2023. Item B, payroll checks for February totaling $118,681.99. Item C, maintenance and operation checks number 27340 to 27403, totaling $1,402,657.33. Item D, approved passenger facility charge totaling $43,763.32 for February 23. And item E, financial reports for February 2023. Does any board member have an item they would like to pull for further discussion? Perfect. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion. Approve the consent agenda.
Got a motion? Any further discussion? And a second.
I'll second it.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor of approving the consent agenda, say aye.
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 And nay. And the ayes have it. All right, on to director's report.
Yes, thank you. Lots to talk about this month. February traffic was up about 17% over the prior year. We still had some continued weakness, particularly on the Delta flights. Salt Lake was a 63% average load for the month and 48% on Minneapolis for the month. The Minneapolis weakness isn't surprising. That flight was announced about 60 days before it started flying. So at that point, you've missed a portion of the booking window where people have already booked. So we do expect it'll be much better this month. I think the Salt Lake traffic still has to do with that construction down there in Salt Lake City. And so we saw United in the same month boarded about 82%. So I think people are still opting to route around Salt Lake when they can. And so hopefully that'll infill as that construction gets a little better. It's kind of hit and miss now whether you're on the main concourse versus whether you're in the busing operation. But obviously, over the next few months, that'll continue to improve, and eventually we'll be done with the busing operation on there. So, looking ahead to hopefully better statistics going forward in March. We fell about 400 passengers below 2020, February 2020. That's the last kind of normal pre-COVID month, which is about 3% below the 2020 numbers. So we're very close to recovered in terms of the activity. We had empty seats. We could have been higher than 2020, but the market just wasn't filling those seats in February. So we'll hope for a better situation in March. We're entering the stronger time of year. January and February are typically the slowest months up here at GTF. And so as we get into March, we should see a little bit better traffic. April and May, all those months tend to perform better. Through the end of summer right now, we're about on par with 2019 seats. We'll have about the same number of seats that we had in 2019. So we would expect volumes similar to 2019 for the next 4 or 5 months. And hopefully that'll kind of be the end of the COVID recovery over the next few months. We have signed up for Jumpstart in mid-June. That's the first of the annual meetings that we go to with airline route planners. Just this week, we put in our request for meetings. We'll be hoping to meet with all the carriers we currently have, along with several new potential carriers. That'll be our first opportunity to meet with American since we got our grant. There hasn't been a route planning conference since we got our grant last fall. So hopefully that'll be the first opportunity to sit down with them and kind of go through things. Other things we're working on, Shailene and I, now that we have the financials, are working on the airline reconciliation. At the end of the year, once we have financials, we have to go back and rerun the rates model with the actual numbers instead of the budget numbers we use to set the rates. That's the process almost every U.S. airport uses. The airlines like to be involved in the budgeting process. You charge them budgeted rates throughout the year, and at the end of the year, you true it up. I suspect we probably performed a little better than we had budgeted overall. We'll have to see once we get the numbers in there, which probably will mean we'll be returning some money to the airlines. We don't get a thank you note. Last year, it took about 6 months for a couple of them after we finally called and said, look, you got to cash this check or we're canceling it. Some of those checks were 10 grand. And so it's not for them, it's not a real important process, but it is a fiscal process we have to go through every year. And so we'll be undertaking that. Hopefully in the next week we can get that wrapped up. And then that'll pave the way for us to start the budget. The rates and charges model that we use is a multi-year model. And so we like to get the year closed out and then start on the budget for the next year so we can have instant feedback on what the rates look like in the following year. So we'll be starting that budget process hopefully towards the beginning of April. And my goal would be to bring the board a budget at the April and May meeting. We don't like to go all the way to the June meeting because obviously the new fiscal year would start a couple days later. So we like to get that done in May. So as soon as we can get that airline reconciliation done, we'll turn our attention to budget and try to get that budget pulled together. On the construction side, I attended a call today. The icing pad project will restart in May. We'll be getting in there and finishing up the last bit of that. I suspect it'll probably be done, hopefully I would think before August, to finish up that little bit of paving we've got yet to do out there and get that pad open. Access control, we've got bids coming at the end of the week. We should see the bids. I suspect we'll probably have 4 or 5 bidders at least, which will be really a good field. We're anxious to get that project underway. That'll be adding all the smart locks to the doors, badge readers, and CCTV. This will be the first phase of what I expect will be kind of a multi-year rollout. We'll get what we need to get done in this project, and I suspect we'll probably add some more in the years to come to get things we'd like to have in terms of CCTV coverage and additional doors that may not be a sided door or a secure access door, but would be a door we want to keep secured and only have limited access to. We'd also like to add some door alarms. There's going to be a number of doors, there already are, a number of doors that go to the airfield that the airlines are locked out of. Like for instance, the basement floor of their loading bridges, they all have doors, but the airlines are locked out of those. We'd like to at least have a monitor on there to tell us if that door's come open somehow, so that we can monitor that. But that'll be an example of a future phase, nice to have that we want to get in the future to add into the system, but probably won't in the first rollout. Ticketing update, you probably saw some of the news coverage. There'll be another report that I just filmed this morning with KFDB that'll either play tomorrow or the next day, kind of covering that ticketing project. Delta has moved into their new counters and new offices, Allegiant's in their new office, but not their new counter. And then Alaska is in the temporary kind of Quonset hut in the middle of nowhere down there with their offices, and their offices being blown out. We hope in this phase to get the Alaska offices blown out, Delta's offices blown out, and a portion of United's offices blown out. Pretty soon we'll be constructing the new back wall so that the entire airport operation on this side can be out of the secure area, the future secure area. And then we'll be moving the two CT-80s on the 3rd and the 10th. So that's coming up in a little over a week. The CT-80s will be kind of moved to the middle and shotgunned, so they'll be next to each other. We're excited for that to happen. As that portion of the project advances, the Bozeman folks will be taking a vote at their board meeting, I think in 2 weeks, 2 weeks from Thursday, to determine if they're going to give us the bag belts that we'd asked for. They have some extra belts coming out of their remodel that are pretty lightly used and would be really a great boost to our project. So we should find out in 2 weeks. Some of those belts aren't available until June. So we'll have some different configurations between now and then as we try to get bags back to the screening machines. But we anticipate our belts will be, the new take-back belts behind the airlines should be here sometime in September. So that'll really have us completing the baggage system sometime in October, most likely. But an important part of that project will be a nice boost. The canopy design, we're just about at 30% design. We're going to be doing a design review meeting next week to look at that project. That'll be one of the bigger construction projects we have this summer to kind of renovate that canopy right there. Changing the roof over to a metal roof instead of what we have. We'll be adding some signage, adding some cladding to it to hide some new electrical and quite a bit of new lighting. There isn't much lighting under that now, and that's a frequent complaint, so we'll be addressing all of that. And then you may remember we have the sewer pipe we put in last year that runs the length of the front of the building. So all the new drainage system will be piped into that sewer pipe so we can get the water out of there. Currently it spills back into the building and then goes under the sidewalk and cracks the sidewalk. So now that we have a pipe, we can remedy that and can get everything ship-shape. Let's see, sweep account, yes. We're very close to finalizing the sweep account. I think the final signatures here for us to set up that account. It is a new account with a new account number, so we want to make sure we point out in a public meeting that we are opening a new account, and that's what it's for. It's our money will be swept into there overnight. We'll earn 1% on balances that are in that checking account. Not a great return, so we'll continue to try and find ways to squirrel away dollars in CDs and the state STIP fund as we have timing differences with money we have on hand. You might have noticed this month you've got this sheet that Shailene puts together. Our reserves dropped about $1 million this month as we continue to spend on that ticketing project. We anticipate probably it'll drop a little bit more. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't come out of that project with about $5 or $6 million left before we start the industrial condos, which will take us down another $2 million. So we'll be down to $3 million, I would suspect, by August. Depending on how much cash flow we're generating in, that might start to rebuild a little bit. But we've got a lot of spending to do over the next 6 months, so I do expect those reserve accounts to start to draw down. Let's see, what else we got here? Oh yeah, on the financials, you'll probably see the expense side, particularly on the repairs and maintenance, a little bit on the labor side, and operating supplies. We are over budget. The total budget, we're about 8% over year to date. We're coming to the end of the snow months, so we expect that to slow. We don't need broom fuel, we won't need as much diesel, those types of things. So we're still hoping we can end up under budget for the year or at budget for the year. We may have to come back to the board as we look at the end of the year and the budget over the next month. We may have to come back to the board for a slight variance towards as we get closer to May to finish the year in the operating budget. We are a little bit high. Revenue, on the revenue side, we're doing quite well, particularly the concession-related revenues, parking, rental car, food and beverage is really doing exceptionally well. Everything that's kind of passenger denominated, we're well over budget. And the revenue side in total is well over budget, mainly because of those passenger-denominated charges. Landing fees are doing well. We're ahead of schedule on most of the airline charges. So it looks like we'll finish the year pretty strong revenue-wise and pretty close to target on expenses. That's at least the forecast right now. And that's all I've got.
Going back to American, what's the plan or the pitch or the hope? What are we trying to get with American?
I think realistically, American probably would want to come into this market daily because it is a new market. It doesn't do them a lot of good to have 3 flights a day into their hub cities and what you do with the other days of the week with that plane. So I think our pitch would probably be daily service, seasonal, probably June through August to start and see how that does. That is a lot of capacity for our market. It'll be interesting as we talk to them about the availability of long-range 76ers. They have primarily short-range 76-seaters, and the short-range 76-seater won't be able to reach our market. So as I say here right now, my guess would be that's a 90-seat plane because that's what they have that could reach our market. And so 90 additional seats a day on a market in the summertime that generally has 700 seat demand is a healthy slug of new capacity. So good news is the majority of that flight is going to be inbound, much like the Chicago flight. That one's 70% inbound. We would hope the Dallas flight might even be higher, might get 75% inbound, and so that would take up a lot of the capacity, and then hopefully just additional growth in the market would take up the other 25%. So and it as I've been looking at that potential for that flight over the last couple of months, the regional jet pilots now are paid about double what they were paid when American entered the market in Bozeman and Billings and Missoula. They're one of the fastest growing labor categories in aviation right now. And so, and fuel costs are up substantially from where we were 3-4 years ago. So certainly that is a tougher sell than it was a few years back. And so I don't, we have what we have in terms of incentives, and we may need to go back and try to raise a little bit more money to get that incentive pool to where American thinks it's enough. And so that's definitely a potential outcome out there.
Wasn't Helena pursuing the same thing?
Helena had gotten a SCASI grant for Phoenix service about, gosh, it's been 3 years ago?
Yeah.
3 years ago. I don't think there was much interest in that. And so they just last fall, right as we were getting ours, amended their application to go for Dallas service. So more or less they're looking at the same service we're looking at. And that market is about 2/3 our size right now. It's a fast growing market in terms of population. In the last 20 years, they've grown 20 times our growth rate. Probably in the next 10 years, they'll overtake us in terms of MSA population if the current trend continues. So, I mean, it's not a market that we can, just overlook. But I don't know, I mean, I couldn't speak for any of the airlines if it makes sense to have service in both places, any particular city in both places. I think like a Dallas is not a top 10 market for either us or Helena. It's going to be down in the bottom 10 to 20 in terms of what we would call origin and destination. Excuse me, origin and destination traffic. It's going to be like number 18, 14, somewhere in there. So it's not like a slam dunk that it makes sense from every city in Montana. So it'll be interesting to see how that all evolves.
John, do you have an update on condos?
Yeah, we are working with Dick Anderson to get the order in. We picked some colors 2 weeks ago and got that in, and so those units should be moving into production here pretty shortly. We've ordered the 3 units that we've talked about initially. We're still working some with the tenant that we would like to get into those condos. They're still working with their bank. They've made quite a bit of progress from what I understand in trying to pull together the capital to expand their operation, because with moving into our location, they would be expanding their production pretty significantly. And so they have about as much in production equipment as we have in the condos. It's quite a bit of equipment. So they're trying to get that financing together. I think, we're still their top site, and it's just going to be a matter of the timing. The plan currently is Dick Anderson thinks once we're in production that we could probably change order in to add more units, and so that's how we're pursuing it. It would be nice to know that sooner rather than later, which we've communicated to the tenant, because we probably would build less doors and that kind of thing if we have one tenant in 5 units as opposed to assuming that we're going to have 3 different tenants. We'd have less overhead doors and that kind of stuff. So we're still trying to pull all that together. Yeah, we should be in production here pretty quick. So
Sounds like the probability of the tenant has gone up a little, given that they're seeking financing, or?
yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, as they've said, I mean, this is the only plan that's made sense of anything they've looked at. And so, I mean, it's kind of like pushing a rope. We can't really, give them an ultimatum. I mean, that won't work. But it is the site that they think they'd like to be in. And so, we aren't going to try to pressure them into a quick decision because it is a monumental decision for their business, a mom and pop shop that's out of their pocket. One of them works full-time, the other one runs the business. And so, it's a big deal for them, multi-million-dollar deal. So,
Have you had any other good leads?
not really. I mean, we've had other leads, but I wouldn't say anything. I mean, certainly nothing that meets the full potential of these units, and not really a ton of interest that really, I think, part of the problem is the cost has gone up so dramatically on metal buildings. It is coming down some. Nucor told Dick Anderson that we could expect a slight reduction in the sheet metal cost, which is good, but a slight reduction doesn't match up with the 50% increase that we saw in the start of COVID. So we're hoping to get some new numbers here shortly as that moves into production on where we are. Then there's all the sub prices too that Dick Anderson's got to refresh, so we can start that work. But hopefully the units will come down some. I think part of the problem now is the cost of those units is so high, we have to have somebody in there that's really creating a lot of value in order for that to make sense. A mom and pop welding shop, is going to struggle to pay, what we're going to need in those units right now to make that all make sense. Now, there aren't other alternatives is the problem. There just aren't other buildings in Great Falls that can scratch this itch. You don't have anything else you can do. So I think increasingly as industrial businesses are expanding, this will be the site that they look to because, it's flexible, your long-term costs are kind of locked in, and it has those advantages. But right now, I think it is costly, per square foot for a lot of small businesses.
I don't know if we have the space down there if Loves would be even interested, but a lot of Loves around the country are building overnight RV parks. They're just pads with hookups and to sort of catch the stop on the highway type traffic. And I don't know if ours would be interested in something like that. I think they're a big plan on building quite a few of those.
They also operate a lot of hotels. The biggest problem with those is we can't have overnight residents, we can't have permanent residents, and as you see down there at Dick's, if you pay attention, that kind of front row along the highway there, not one of those units has moved in a few years. And so, we got to be a little bit careful what we get on that property because the FAA won't allow us to have residents.
I don't think they allow it long
Yeah,
term.
if you could kick them out in a week, it's not a bad idea.
I don't know what their length is, but it's not, they're not going after
Not
that
going after
market.
that market, yeah, and that might be something we could talk to them about. In the long term, we're hoping that property really develops into something that is important to the economic future of the community down that front. But as a land bank, that's not a bad way to, to earn some cash. Certainly we have Ashley out there right now on largely an improved lot. That's a pretty nice little income for us. So, we can give Lowe's a call and kind of see.
Oh, it's just something I saw,
Yeah.
an article about these new
It's not a bad idea.
overnight stops.
We all know that there's a shortage of camping in Great Falls, and that's,
Especially close to the interstate.
yeah, and hotels. I still think that's a pretty good location for a hotel also. Which is probably time we have that conversation with them again. That's actually how we got introduced to them. Was,
Oh, okay.
gosh, I bet you might have been on board, but we did a hotel study, I think about 5 years ago, and one of the prospects ended up being Love's. Of course, we didn't know that at the time, but they came out and looked at the spot, the actual owner did. And he came back and said, I'd really like to get a gas station in there. And, that's how we kind of ended up with that. But probably a good time to rekindle those discussions on the
I
hotel.
didn't know they did hotels.
Yeah, yeah.
Are they branded as Love's Hotels?
No, they have like 6 or 7 different brands, kind of like the restaurants. They'll run Subways or Green Chili. What's the Mexican one? Green Hornet.
Okay. Like a franchise.
Yeah, so they have like 6 or 7 different restaurants they typically work with, and they have like 4 or 5 different hotel brands. I want to say Holiday Inn Express. They were all ones we already had. I remember that. But I think it was Holiday Inn Express. I want to say Hampton, a couple other ones, but it was ones we had. But they also said, look, if it's the right project, we'll go buy a different franchise tag and do that. So.
Okay.
How long is Ashley out there? Are they in a long-term?
It's just year to
Year
year.
to year to year. But they've been there, what, 3 years already?
2 or 3.
2 or 3 years already.
Actually, it's the Fairfield Inn and Holiday Inn Express.
Fairfield Inn.
There's one in Texas that's the Fairfield Inn and the Holiday Inn Express in Utah.
Yeah.
That loves them.
Yeah, they're nice hotels, and the one in Utah, I think, is one of the ones they showed us. It was pretty new at the time. It was a nice hotel. Other questions?
What, remind me what the square footage rental charge is going to be
For which?
for your condos?
Well, okay, so for the condo, if you're renting a condo, we're at about $22 a square foot. You can buy the condo though, and then you just pay the land rent. So you can do either one. Yeah, but and the 22, I mean, that's, completely built out, ready to move in, garage space, all the utilities are in and everything. And then, of course, the association takes care of the ceiling or the roof and the walls and everything, so. But yeah, interestingly, if you go out and look on the internet, it's not hard to find it. Similar projects and buildings, actually less capability. The ceiling heights are lower. They're not double loaded, so you can't drive through. It's a single loaded building. The ones in Missoula rent for over that. I think the ones in Billings rent for over that too. So we're not out of the Montana market. We're just out of the local market, which doesn't do you any good. But over time, my hope would be that those economics grow back in proportion. I think Great Falls needs to pay a little more. And then, hopefully the cost of these units to produce them per unit will come down some too. And so those lines will eventually meet, would be my hope.
Any other comments, questions around the room?
Are the ticketing counters, are those, so I saw Delta's at the end, is that their permanent area?
Yep, they've got the in-suite and all the offices back behind there. And then United's on the opposite end, which will be good because we've got our 2 big capacities opposite each other, and each one's on a unique belt. So that's we're not trying to cram the 2 biggest volumes into the same belt and machine. So I think that's going to be good. And then Allegiant goes immediately next to Delta, and then Alaska is just next to that. And then we have 6 vacant counters. Right now we don't have any. But we'll have 6 vacant counters in there between United and Allegiant. And the other nice thing too is the IT room, which is largely complete now in the back there. Everything comes to the central IT room. So kind of like an operator switchboard, it's pretty easy for us to go in there and reassign ticket counters. You probably saw Delta is all on the screens now. So that's just a thumb drive. So if we have Sun Country coming in with a charter for the day, we could just put in the thumb drive and brand it Sun Country for the day. And then in the back, you can rearrange those counters pretty easily and the gates. So, if gate 1 breaks and United needs to move to gate 5 for a few weeks, that's just as simple as going in that IT room and switching the wires so that they can go out of gate 5. Currently, we don't have anything like that. When Frontier was here a few years back, we had to run fiber, from down there all the way back to that counter, from the ticket counter in order to get them up and operational.
Anything else? All right, we'll go ahead and move on to the agenda. Only one item on the agenda today. It still has to be asked. Are there any agenda items that present a conflict of interest and consequently require a member to abstain from discussion and vote? Perfect. Agenda item number 1, acceptance of final 2021-22 audit.
Yes, every year we complete a financial audit. Typically we bring these to we try to bring them to the November meeting, but sometimes they end up in December. This year, just the staffing shortage everyone is experiencing, we're running behind, and so we're bringing to the board the financials, the year-end financials today. The Finance Committee did get a chance to meet. Was that last week? Yeah, all ball stuff. We did meet last week and got a chance to go over the financials. And with that, I'd turn it over and see if Megan would like to offer any thoughts on the audit.
Thanks, everyone. My name is Megan Connors. I'm a principal at Pinion. You may have seen me before coming from Anderson Zermulin. In the midst of the audit process, our firm merged with a firm named Keiko Iceland, but they are doing business as Pinion. So you will see 2 different names from us in the future. This audit report will be issued under Keiko Iceland. So just wanted to thank you guys for allowing us to continue to be your independent auditors. Like John mentioned, we have met with the Finance Committee and kind of went over these in much more detail, so I'm going to keep this pretty high level. I just wanted to remind everyone here who has or has not seen the financial statements. There's 5 different sections and types of areas within the financial statements. The first of which is management's discussion and analysis, and that's required for all government entities to include in their financial report. And really what that does is it gives everybody a qualitative and narrative picture of the numbers. Not all of us are quantitative and stuck in those types of details. So it really is very valuable and useful information for readers of the financial statements to review. And then we'll have our financial statements and footnotes, which includes our independent auditor's report. And then in the back, because this is a government audit, there's federal funding, and you guys have passenger facility charge requirements. There's 3 more reports in the back related to internal controls and compliance in those 3 different areas. First and foremost, wanted to congratulate the airport on a unmodified, or what we call clean audit opinion for fiscal 22. If you went to the back of the financial statements where we do have those separate reports in accordance with government auditing standards, the first report is based off of internal control over financial reporting and compliance. You will see there that there is a material weakness being disclosed there, just simply related to the number of audit adjustments that we had to make this year. And then also as it relates to federal financial assistance programs, so your airport improvement programs, including the COVID money, we're going to see an additional material weakness there, simply related to some double dipping in layman's terms, but some expenditures on some of the COVID grants were reimbursed under 2 different grant programs, one in fiscal 20 and then again this year. That has since been resolved with the FAA, so there really wasn't a compliance finding related to that because they resolved that with the airport ahead of this audit being issued, so it simply is an internal control over compliance type findings. In the back, after these 2 findings, you will see required corrective action plans, which will outline the airport's plan for how they're going to address the finding, or if it's already been addressed, the timeline and who's responsible. So that information is back there for any of those that are interested in that. And then the last report is related to internal controls and compliance over the passenger facility charge program, which we are required to do with FAA regulations, and that one did not have any findings or areas of non-compliance. So I know that was really, really brief. If anyone has any questions on any of the specifics, I'd be happy to answer them in conjunction with the folks here. But just wanted to, again, thank these guys. Shailene came in halfway through the process, almost exactly, and really helped us get this done timely, because we'll have to get it issued by the end of this week.
That biggest issue is just keeping our
Agreed.
I've got some questions, Megan. Approximately how many adjusting journal entries did the audit firm have to prepare this year?
Close to 30.
Okay.
And it was kind of a combination of things, but a lot of it was simply just, with turnover at year end, some of those year-end account reconciliations and balances didn't get updated.
But very similar to the last couple of years.
It's almost identical.
Because we've
Yep.
had that finding 3 years running now.
Yep.
Last year was a material weakness, this year material weakness. So we're not a low-risk auditee.
So there's two different things here. This you guys were, because last year there was only material weakness on the financial statement side, not the compliance side. Now this year with that other finding on the compliance side, you will not be considered a low-risk auditee. Now certainly from our standpoint as auditors, that doesn't change anything because you guys, unless you guys get a bunch of new federal programs, it doesn't change what we have to audit. I mean, we still will have the one major program.
So it wasn't a material weakness in internal control and or the federal.
There was
internal
two
control.
separate ones. But
Just
last year,
to be a low risk.
correct,
auditee.
it's got to be on the compliance side, a material weakness, yeah.
Would it be fair to say that if, with the auditor's assistance, we made all those journal entries at year end, that we wouldn't have received an unmodified opinion?
Correct, I mean, yeah, I mean,
Okay.
and
So I guess I'm getting at that the audit firm is assisting us in fixing our books literally, 6 months into the subsequent year end.
yeah.
Another question I had was, we had some prior period adjustments, some rather large prior period adjustments to the tune of about $1.5 million. So last year's audit, if you just took last year's audit report, our financial statements, our net assets were overstated by almost $1.5 billion. Okay? So that was uncovered in this year's audit. Just not knowing anything, just reading it, part of it was for repairs and maintenance that were included in CIP. And the other part was depreciation on assets that should have been placed into service and started being depreciated. I would guess that number is about $950,000 of the total. So that would tell me just off the cuff that those over several years that we had to go back and fix accumulated depreciation. Is that?
That's correct.
That's
That's
correct.
absolutely correct.
So it doesn't look like that count has been correct in a long time. I mean, how many years was that depreciation?
I would say when we reviewed the listing, probably the earliest assets that were CIP dates were back to maybe 2012, but most of them were more in the last 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
There were some projects that were started but never finished. Even before I got here, like there was at one point the airport had wanted to take on a survey of the entire property. But I think the survey data was not readily available, and so they got into that project, and I think, Steve, I think you even worked on that. So the airport never finished that process. And so that one was in there for quite a while. And part of it is like the master plan, for example, when you finish the master plan, it takes the FAA, sometimes it can take multiple years. I mean, SeaTac had one out there for years and years and years. It was never accepted by the FAA, and then finally it was accepted, I think it's 8 or 10 years later. So I think in our case, the master plan set out there for a while. I think that was during Maria's transition out, and it was never closed and moved into assets. So we've had some projects like that just set in work in progress and were never pulled out of work in progress. And so as we went through with Megan, a lot of those projects this last year, some of them we chose just to expense, like for instance that survey work, and there's not really an asset, so we expense that. Others like master plan, that is an asset that we eventually did complete. So that gets moved over, and so those adjusting entries. The FedEx one, I knew we would struggle with that. And that's a complicated transaction. That's one of the bigger entries also. That's at the end of that lease. We had paid back debt early in order to capture that savings. And then it took FedEx nearly a year to complete the new agreement. The new agreement's actually what I would have called back in the day a capital lease. But of course that accounting rule has also changed. And so we're basically renting to own, they're renting to own that building. So that, we knew that would be a difficult one to complete. So, I mean, there's various, projects and things like that, lease in those entries if you look through them, that contribute to those numbers.
Right, and just because we, FAA approval or sign off final isn't gap either. When we place something in service, when it's substantially done, and, the depreciation starts because we're using those assets or that accumulation of assets, is different than getting that final sign off that may be.
So the way we get the final sign off, remember, we're holding retention, right? And so the final sign off is what is a closeout report, which is a few hundred pages, Steve. I mean, it's an entire book that includes all your acceptance tests. So the kinds of outcomes that come from those are things like your sampling for your asphalt doesn't show that you get full payment. And, so oftentimes that's when the lawsuits start as a closeout. And so for instance, the runway project we did with United a few years ago, before I was here, the closeout resulted in a lawsuit that took several years to finish. Payments weren't made to the tune of, I think it was over $1 million, the settlement was. And there was contested results on the acceptance testing. So a lot hangs in the balance until that acceptance report is accepted.
But it's something that GAP requires us to do every year annually, and some things aren't cut and dry, but we review it, management reviews it, and comes up with, okay, here's our justification to the auditors that it still should stay in there, or we need to take it out and start depreciating. But I think the numbers obviously can get pretty big.
Yeah.
And that's where I'd say the balances grew over probably the last 2 to 3 years versus it being anything older than 5 years. That balance was pretty material, and I think in prior audits, we looked at it as auditors and said, yeah, the depreciation on that isn't material, and moved on. But then as that there was specific things that kind of started to grow, and that's why we took a deeper dive into it this year.
Makes sense. More of a technical question. Does GAP require that we restate when we prepare comparative financials, we restate the prior year when you have a prior period adjustment material?
That's a great question. So this isn't a true comparative presentation. There's a paragraph in the independent auditor's report that addresses the fact that these are not comparative, but for the financial statements, we include the prior year. And since I didn't have a true comparative presentation, I did not go back and adjust the 21 numbers. The footnotes are only going to be a single year presentation, but there's a... So
it's kind of more information only that
yes, it
prepared
is.
for...
Yep.
The comparative numbers are there, but not a true restatement like you'd have in a... I just wanted to make sure something didn't change since I retired.
You weren't the first person that's asking that.
One thing we did talk about at the Finance Committee was the possibility of Megan staying around for another year. Obviously, we're doing an RFP for a new organization to come in and do this, but I mean, I've been here 5 years and we've had 4 different accountants in 5 years. Not that that's an excuse, but it's obviously it's been a factor every year. So we just discussed the possibility of that. I don't know how realistic it is, but if we can get 2 consecutive years with the same accountant and the same auditor, potentially that would help us out. So we did some discussions there, but I don't know how realistic that is.
And I think Shailene would agree. The key to not having this reconciliation finding for the 4th straight year would be to all year long doing things monthly and having reconciled. There's certain, and we chatted just a little bit outside before the meeting. A lot of the balance, and we're talking balance sheet accounts. The P&L, fine, it might get reclassed. Who cares? In the big picture, a lot of the accounts are monthly reconciled. There's some that maybe it makes sense quarterly. It's just not worth it to get it down to the month. And then there's a couple that are annually, like some of this
work in progress,
construction progress. And so if you've got 85% of your work done every month, it's just another month.
Yeah.
So it's not this pile of work that we have to do, in August and September and October and November. And then the auditors come in and they fix 30 accounts. And that's the key. And then you've got our last quarter, the year-end entries that we do maybe in August when we know everything. Mm-hmm. And we're done, and we're ready for audit earlier. Hopefully the auditors will be ready too, but and then we get back to that being done. Because one of the things, and again, thank goodness we get this done by March 31 and issued, we're still in compliance with the Single Audit Act, which requires to be done 9 months after year end. So that's a good thing, a very big thing. But if you do have findings, and I don't think it's our case, but if you do have significant findings, if you don't find out about them until 9 months after year end, how good is next year?
Right.
We got a pile of work to do in 1 quarter to get things, to get the ship right. So the earlier we get the audit done, the earlier we find out things we still need to improve on, and we've got a lot more year to get it done. Anyway, that's all I got.
Any other questions?
Just to clarify your question earlier, we still are a low-risk auditee.
You
Is
will
that-
not be after this
No.
year.
Okay.
It'll take 2 more years
So we
after
need
this.
2 years of,
But like I said, unless you guys get some new federal programs, the AIP is just the only major program you guys have, and it won't affect the audit necessarily, but it will be disclosed in the financials.
they need to do more testing when you're not a low-risk auditee. Doesn't mean we're a high-risk auditee, we're just not a low-risk auditee, as weird as that sounds. But they're required to do more testing if we had more than one federal program that's included in our audit.
Do you have anything else to mention from the meeting? Any other questions, comments, concerns from the board? Sean looks like he's thinking hard.
Trying to understand the jargon going back and forth. I assume not being a low risk, that just means the cost of the audit's going up.
No. In some cases, yes. If you had 20 federal programs and we had to test 5 more programs, certainly. But you guys only have the one, and we still have to test the same program. So it shouldn't. That being said, unless there's a change in auditors. So I don't know if all the board knows, but our firm has made the decision to not do government audits anymore. And so we'll run out the contracts that we have existing. And that's why there was some discussion about just trying to keep us for 1 more year so that we have some consistency. But we'll work through that with the RFP process.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? All right, I guess with that discussion then, can I have a motion to accept the final 2021-2022 audit?
I'll make a motion to accept the final 2022 audit.
Got a motion, any other comments or discussion? And a second.
I'll second it.
Got a motion and a second. All right, all in favor of accepting the final 2021-2022 audit, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and nay. And ayes have it. Cool. Any additional authority board comments? Commissioner Husted, Commissioner Hogan.
I would support having the same auditor next year.
I would second. Commissioner Gibbs? Commissioner Timbo?
No.
Commissioner Aaron's? All right, I have no additional comments. Any additional public comments? Thank you all for being here. Thanks for coming, Megan. With no further business before the board, I declare this meeting adjourned. We'll meet back in 5 for the work session.